Hey, welcome back to the Renewed Church podcast, where we have honest and authentic conversations around Jesus and his mission. My name is Erik, and I am joined in studio yet again by my very handsome-looking co-host, Pastor Andrew Wood. How are you this fine day?
I am haircut-less in comparison to you this fine day.
My wife, she crushed it, man. I have been paying for haircuts for a long, long time, and I think I'm done. I think this is the last. This is it.
This is the best you've had.
I love this haircut.
Yeah. And I was saying to you earlier that not only did you get your hair cut, but you got your hair faded.
Yeah.
And to have like a decent fade done at home is that's all you really need in life.
YouTube.
Yeah. So I'm actually impressed. And my wife's been telling me to get my hair cut for weeks, and I haven't figured out what I need in order to do that. So
if you've stumbled across this podcast in a year or so, this is amidst our quarantine. So
that's helpful, yeah.
That's why we're talking about this.
What should I do with my hair?
I think you should grow it out and get a nice fade.
You think?
With a little bit of length on the top. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
that's our barbershop. That's our barbershop segment.
I've actually always wanted to have a barber that I went to regularly that had barbershop conversations. I got my hair cut by a Filipino lady who's so sweet and so nice at Erin Mills Town Center, the barber's chair, because my dad has gone there basically his whole life. But she's not like barber chair, talk shop type, you know?
Yeah, you want like the movie barbershop.
Yeah. Or like the show,
LeBron
the LeBron James show. Yeah. Like something where it's like someone's doing my hair, but I'm having great, compelling conversations with others around me. Do those exist? I haven't seen one here in Canada, especially in Milton, Ontario.
No, back home, I used to get my hair cut by a lady who smelled like Doritos. So,
did she offer you any Doritos?
No, I've never.
See, that would have been a close second.
Dorito. Well, speaking of meaningful conversation, we're really excited about this episode of the podcast. We have some cool things we are going to just talk about, and we hope that it's engaging for you guys too, listening at home. Just want to quick remind you to subscribe to the podcast for sure to get alerts when we post these. That's really awesome. Whether you're watching on YouTube or just listening to the audio, make sure you sign up and subscribe. That helps us. It helps you. It's a win-win-win. So
it is.
Make sure you do that. Also, if you have questions or comments or things that you'd like to see talked about, just go ahead and post those in the comments or send us an email or whatever.
Yeah, that would be super helpful. What email would they send that to?
You can send it to Erik@renewedchurch.ca.
Nice.
ERIK.
Erik with a K.
Erik with a K.
Okay.
So, well, let's dive in today. I think we have some cool things coming up. So at the time of this recording, this is Palm Sunday. And in a week from now will be the most important Christian quote-unquote holiday. Well, not quote-unquote.
No, it's a holiday. We get a day off, I think, in Canada still.
Yeah. Well, you should. Yeah. It's sweet. So Easter, or as I prefer, the Resurrection Sunday, where we celebrate Jesus, his resurrection.
Do we have to talk why you prefer Resurrection Sunday?
I mean, we don't have to talk about that today.
Okay.
That's probably a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. For those who are wondering, what's the short and sweet?
The short version is I don't worship a bunny with eggs or a pagan goddess named Ishtar. So I call it Resurrection Sunday.
Right.
You wouldn't call Christmas, winter solstice or Saturnalia or whatever.
Christians actually get really mad at people who do.
Right. So it's the same thing.
Isn't that funny?
It's actually worse in my opinion, but that's okay.
But you're not mad about it. Like you understand where we're at.
I'm on a small, it's like sort of like the fire the little ember that always is a little bit burning, like I am serious, but I'm fine with the bunnies and the Easter eggs. And
There's like 98% of us who are like, okay, yeah, I actually get that, but I'm never going to correct somebody.
Yeah,
You're
I'm
the
never
1% who will correct somebody, and then there's 1% who will do worse things than correct somebody.
I don't correct people. I go with it, but when I have a platform to tell about, the dangers of Ishtar and her demonic presence. No, I'm just kidding. I do so.
Yeah. Sorry to sidetrack us. Take us on a rabbit trail.
Oh, I see what you did. Anyway, so Easter is coming up. And for Renew Church, we are doing sort of a liturgical practice. Yeah. And we're going to kind of walk through the Passover meal and a Seder meal and do some other things. And you I think this was kind of your brainchild in our staff meeting. As far as the Seder kind of idea. And why don't you just give us a brief, for those of you guys who are participating, it's going to be super fun, but why don't you just give us a brief kind of, what is the Seder meal?
Well, so I did this a few years ago, and it was a recommendation from my wife, because she hadn't done it many years ago, and thought it would be a unique thing for us to do with our young adults group. And what we did then was we basically took what is commonly known today as a Jewish Seder meal,
right?
Which you can read the literature on it, but it's really just it's a Jewish holiday. It's actually one of the biggest Jewish holidays, celebrating the Passover. Yeah. And then there's all these kind of elements that you eat with this meal, and there's some like reciting of certain psalms and some back and forth, readings of scripture, and there's different kind of elements that you take, and they all have representation of different things.
Right.
And so we thought it would be cool to do something like that, obviously with in mind that Jesus is the Messiah that was expected and anticipated, right. And Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is kind of like the quote unquote new Exodus.
Yeah.
So we kind of did that. So it's a co-opted kind of Jewish celebration. And we did that a few years ago, and we had a really good experience with it with the young adults. So it was unique as an evangelical. We don't really, and we'll talk about this in a second. But we don't really have like that kind of liturgy that we do necessarily. Right. Everything, it's not as formal, and it was nice to actually take things back and do something formal, step by step. Read and repeat type stuff. And then kind of talk about the meaning behind it. So that's what we did. And then I thought, that'd be really cool to be able to do something like that as a whole church, because most of our church has probably never done a Seder before, and because Christians aren't, it's a Jewish thing, right? Yeah. It can be a Christian thing, if you have certain ideas about it. But yeah. So
3/4 of the Bible is for Jewish people, so.
Yeah. And Christianity is really just a Jewish offshoot, right? But so we won't get into that. But what we thought would be cool for our whole church is to actually do a Seder, because we're all at home with our families. We're all looking for unique things to do. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to have a live stream of somebody walking us through the different elements and the different readings and the different recitings, and then families at home can actually watch that and take the certain elements and kind of repeat the certain times and do the certain things together while eating together around a table.
I'm really excited about it because I'm sick of churches doing the egg drop thing, where they do the helicopter and they so I'm from the States, and like every big church around us does like a thing where they take Easter eggs up into a helicopter and like throw them out, and then kids run and get them.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it was
cool once.
And it sounds cool. Yeah.
But once. Now every church does it every year, and you're just kind of like, okay, come on.
I see. That's the thing. I've never been to one.
Come on, Keith Manier.
Right?
I'm just kidding.
I hope he doesn't.
I love you, Keith. I'm just kidding.
No, but so like I've never actually been to a helicopter drop, because there's not that many churches around here that are paying that kind of money to do that kind of thing. Yeah. So, but I get what you're saying. The Easter egg hunt. We've done the Easter egg hunt.
We've done the Easter egg hunt.
It's always a great way to get kids out, families out. They get free stuff. Everyone loves free chocolate, et cetera, et cetera. But you're right. It's kind of like we're celebrating something that maybe isn't Jesus, and then we're also spending a lot of money on it.
Did your parents do like Easter gifts?
They did. I think when we were younger, we did Easter egg hunts, and then they would do like Easter baskets with mostly candies in it, and maybe like a Lego set or something. You'd have to ask them. I don't actually remember.
Trinkety things. I remember one time getting the VHS copy of Aladdin in my Easter basket.
That might be an all-time.
My sister and I were thrilled to get that, because back then those Disney VHS tapes were gold.
You got a pagan gift on a different pagan holiday.
That's right. Right, exactly. I mean, you're going to be pagan. You might as well go all the way, right? So anyway, that's cool. So this kind of talk about Seder, talk about this kind of new practice and stuff like that, for us, at least as Renew Church, it sort of spawned a conversation with you and I just about liturgy in general. And it was something I thought would be kind of fun to talk about especially leading up to us doing something a little bit more liturgical.
Yeah.
And so just for you, if you've never heard that word, liturgy, basically it's just a formal practice of religious worship, right? It's like anything that you do that's like officially part of your religion. And so great examples of that are traditionally like Catholic traditions or stuff like that. What are some liturgies that you think of when you think of liturgies?
I mean, when I think of them, I think of like high church.
Yeah.
Like, sit down, stand up, do the cross, do the thing, dip the hand in the water, sprinkle it here, cross the bow. I think of like a Romanian Orthodox wedding I was at a couple years ago where I didn't understand a single thing that was going on, but it seemed like everything was purposeful and meaningful.
Yeah.
And they were doing all these different elements and kissing like this and putting crowns on and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So I picture that when I think of liturgy, which it is liturgy.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, like that was one of the things that we talked about. It was that primarily, at least in North America, when we talk about liturgy, we're talking about high church. We're talking about, practices that would be practiced by like Catholics or Orthodox,
Anglicans, Orthodox,
all that kind of stuff. Presbyterian even is a Protestant, but sort of still liturgical in their practices and stuff like that. And so I was kind of struck with, I read a book a couple of years ago by a guy named James K.A. Smith, and he's the professor of philosophy, I think, at Calvin College. And he wrote a really interesting book called You Are What You Love. You Are What You Love. And the book was really, I don't remember everything that it was several years ago, but the book was kind of maybe we should revisit liturgy in the Protestant tradition, in the non-Catholic traditions that because typically we don't do many liturgies.
Yeah.
Well, at least we would say we don't.
Yeah. That's the thing. We do. We actually do. I mean, when you show up to Renew Milton, typically the same things happen at the same time every Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we have our own liturgy. We have our own, liturgical order. Yeah. It's not that we have agreed that this exact thing has to happen and it has to happen like this, and these are all the reasons why. Yeah. But we do practice liturgy in all areas of our life, and most consistently when it comes to church practice. It just feels different, it looks different, or we don't really call it that. Or we focus so much on the motivation going into whatever the practice is rather than the actual forms of the practices themselves.
Right.
Which is why you would say, and I would also say, like, in the evangelical Western church, we don't do liturgy.
We don't practice liturgy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, in my context of church, on a typical Sunday, we would, unpack a trailer and set up chairs and, do all that kind of stuff. And so I wonder, if Paulo Garcia is listening to this, and maybe getting the chairs perfectly straight is part of his liturgy.
Yeah.
And it's something that is careful and prepared and, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of an interesting thought. You mentioned some liturgies that we do. Kind of just to broad stroke or identify the liturgies that are kind of, like even preaching.
Yeah.
Like the preaching of a sermon as part of your worship service is a liturgy.
It is, yeah.
The singing of songs, any kind of song.
Praise and worship songs,
hymns or whatever, or praying out loud, or reading the scriptures.
Taking up an offering and doing giving is a liturgical practice. Yeah,
100%. All these things are liturgies, and so it's sort of this. And James K.A. Smith's book. He sort of introduces this idea, which I thought was really, really compelling. And the idea is that we are not primarily thinking beings. In the West, we think we put a lot of stock into thought.
Yeah.
What we think about it. But if I think that I'm the best basketball player that's ever lived, it doesn't really change. You know what I mean? Thinking is not the same as doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And his kind of premise was that what we do actually speaks more to our core desires than what we think. We don't always love the things we think. Have you ever, like, you have these thoughts in your mind, and it's like, oh yeah, that's great. I love tacos or whatever. I don't really, but I think, or maybe when we were younger and dating, we were like, oh man, I think I'm in love with this girl or with this, and we think things, and they don't always turn out to be true. Yeah. But the things that we practice are oftentimes better indicators to us of the things that we love. Yeah. And, he kind of goes into how our culture has identified some of these things, which I thought was really, really compelling. And one of them was our proclivity towards sports teams. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you know people who are liturgical about their team? Yeah, I know. Just think about Sunday football, right? Yeah. Sunday football is liturgical, especially for Americans. Like there's no debate. After church on Sunday, I'm going home and I'm watching the 1:00 game, the 4:00 game, and the 8:00 game, and then Monday Night Football is what I'm watching, no matter who's playing, right? Like that. Yeah. There's a liturgy to that, and then I'm eating. I'm eating chili or jalapeno poppers, right? Yeah, and I'm putting on my jersey, and you know what I mean. Like there's a practice to this. There's a weekly rhythm, I guess. And a lot of people have talked about this kind of thing, and we're not by any means saying that like. I don't think we're vilifying the love of your sports team. No, not at all. But there is something about, like, we get really particular about certain things like that. And sports is really easy when it's, like, some people trick out their basement like mad crazy and kind of create a little shrine. Yeah. To their little, and they have the memorabilia, the artifacts of worship. And, you kind of, you might be putting a little bit of stock into it, a little bit more than it needs to, but there is this kind of liturgy to that sort of lifestyle. And the point is not to say that those things are bad. I think it's awesome. Mm-hmm. I don't really love sports, but I love other things, and I do the same thing to those things that I love. Yeah. Sport or Star Wars or nerd stuff and music and all that kind of stuff. So we all do the same thing. We all do it, right? And his point was, what if we consider the things that we do, the practices that we have, as being liturgical? Yeah. And he even had this kind of remarkable statement that we should take a liturgical audit of our life. I like that. And I thought it was an interesting premise, especially in our season right now, where a lot of us are watching Tiger King and, like binging our Netflix shows or doing our thing. And we have this, we don't necessarily need to throw all that stuff out. No. But we should consider it. Yeah. Yeah, a Canadian psychologist, Jordan Peterson, actually says it a little bit differently, and I picked this up a few years ago from him. The idea was that when people were asking him what he believes about certain things, his definition of belief is only things that he lives as though are true. And so the idea with that is that he won't make a claim of belief unless he's willing to embody it. Right? Sure. Live as though it's true, i.e., if it's a liturgical practice, then that shows actually how much he believes it. And if it's not a part of his liturgy, his weekly routine, his practices, what he's trying to show with his body, what's going on internally, then he probably doesn't believe it. And I think there's something to that audit where you're asking yourself, like, what does my weekly liturgy look like? And what does it say about what I actually think or what I actually believe? Yeah. Yeah, it's for sure. I think that those kind of considerations are so worthwhile, especially if you claim Christ. Like that's one of the things that we're called to is like take account of our life and see, what's in there and how it reflects to the Bible and become more like Jesus. And it is the hope, right? Yeah. So that's kind of we kind of jumped around a little bit, but we've addressed a little bit of like the cultural liturgy. Yeah. Right. What about in religion? Are there liturgies for you that have been helpful? Like besides maybe the ones that we typically think of in North American church, have there been liturgies for you that you've incorporated that have been helpful? Yeah. So one liturgy for me that I found helpful when it is being embodied, when I am living it out, is on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
when we were allowed outside going to our offices.
Remember that?
Yeah, I would try to come to my office in the morning, and I would spend the first hour and a half to 2 hours, and it would include some scripture reflection, but not an hour of it. It would include having ambient music on, so not necessarily worship music, but it was synth, or if it was ambient, it was chill music. It was whatever pads or whatever, and then I would either be podcasting, something I thought was interesting, or I'd be watching something on YouTube that was filling me up spiritually. And so it was like at least a 3-day a week practice liturgy for me that was actually refreshing to me and my soul. It centered me on those days. Yeah. And it kind of reminded me before I started my day of what am I actually about. Yeah. And so for me that was kind of a weekly liturgy that I found helpful. Yeah. I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, and on the podcast, we've talked about stuff like Sabbath that we've incorporated and things like that.
Still working on that, man. It's hard to lock down, but yeah, it's been good.
And I think those personal practices are really, really helpful. But let's even zoom out a little bit further for a second. Like, what are I come from a pretty I've been at a Protestant quote unquote evangelical church my whole life, right? And I've always kind of expressed worship in a very similar way. And one of the things so just a quick church history. Yeah. So when Martin Luther penned his 95 Theses and, started this reformational thing where we get Protestantism, you're protesting the way that the Catholic Church was, is that where it comes from? I think it is. Yep. And that's kind of been the, I don't know, rebirth of our tradition. As we always want to go back to the first century and stuff like that. But we Protestant Christians got really quick to throw things out. Yeah. What are some things that come to mind when we think about throwing things out with the liturgical bathwater? You know what I mean? There's been some practices for us that have always been part of the Christian tradition that we sort of lost in the Reformation because we're trying to distance ourselves from this certain kind of practice and this certain kind of vibe and this certain kind of look. And there's been a lot of those kind of things. We were talking about a few of them. Even just the calendar, the things that we recognize. Yeah. What other things have been?
I mean, I think we've at least what I've observed, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but the more we deconstruct it, I feel like the evangelical church or the Western church or the Protestant church has really held on to two things, which have been baptism and the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist. The bread and cup, right? Like that's the two things Jesus said, do this, right? And then we look at that and go, it's the only two things that Jesus really said, do this. Yeah. And so what we do when we deconstruct is we throw everything out. Right. And then we kind of rebuild it. And what we've rebuilt is what we kind of see today, which is we sometimes do bread and cup. Some churches do it every Sunday. Some do it once in a while. Some do it threefold like we do in our tradition. And then we baptize people who come to know Jesus. And so most Western evangelical Protestant churches are doing that. And then we've all kind of added the praise and worship piece and the teaching of the saints, i.e. preaching the word of God and stuff like that. We've added that, but we know those aren't commands necessarily from Jesus in the same way. We don't think of them as there's two ordinances, right? And everything else is just kind of can look like how it looks, right? So we've kind of thrown everything out. But kind of the big ones, maybe this is, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but I was actually online a couple months ago, and I was looking for different kind of retreat centers where you can have like a silence and solitude retreat. Yeah. And the Catholic tradition is known for that. A lot of high church traditions are known for that. And so I was looking around, and there was one that has built like the world's biggest rosary. Is it the rosary, the beads? Yeah. And it's in Canada, and it's basically like each bead is like this seat you can sit in, and it's all connected by this big white chain or whatever. It's this massive multi-acre thing, right? But then that got me into being like, what is the deal with the rosary? Like I heard about it, I've read about it before, but I was like, what? That's something that's actually beautiful. And when I was watching stuff about it and reading stuff about it, like yes, there's all sorts of worries and concerns with certain things that you pray and who you're praying to, et cetera. Like we can set that aside for a sec because we're talking about liturgy here, and just the practice of going piece by piece and praying about a specific and certain thing piece by piece is beautiful. That's liturgical, and we've totally thrown that out. Yeah. For us, prayer isn't actually reciting anything. We barely recite prayers. We barely even recite the Lord's Prayer. What we, in our tradition, it's like, I've had people say to me, "Can you say one of those prayers when I'm going to do their wedding? Can you say one of those prayers?" I'm like, "What prayers? What are you talking about?" And they're thinking of a scripted prayer, right? Yeah. They're thinking of a written down, scripted historical prayer. And when I think prayer, I think close my eyes and talk to God, right? Yeah. Whatever comes to mind, you know what I mean?
Like you're hanging out
with
your
even
buddies.
To that point, that would be a major thing that I think we've kind of thrown out. And we can do both, but we don't really in our tradition, right?
Yeah. And that brings up kind of the point is we talked about this before the podcast, was liturgy without meaning is pointless.
Yeah, it's just practice. It's religiosity.
It becomes dead religion.
Empty tradition. Yeah.
Empty tradition.
Yep.
But liturgy with meaning is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that there is an individualistic portion of that. Like, I think some liturgies need to be, practiced on your own. Maybe I think you can do those things. But I just found it so remarkable. Like, a lot of my friends come from a Catholic or high church tradition. And, there was a lot of, what I hear a lot as a pastor even is like, we used to stand up and sit down and we used to eat crackers and we don't really know what any of that stuff means, and even things to the way that cathedrals are constructed. And there's actually liturgy to that, to architecture of cathedral. There's liturgy behind the stained glass. The story behind stained glass was before people were literate. They would put kind of the gospel story in image, and it would be a way that people could understand God without having to know how to read.
Isn't that the most fun thing coming from our background?
Yeah.
When you start visiting old churches in different parts of the world, and you start learning, all this isn't just the church showing off and spending their wealth, right? Like everything had a purpose and a meaning, and we've lost that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's easy when you grow up in the tradition and the meaning gets lost. For you to keep going through the motions of practice, and you really don't glean anything from it. And I think that that's what's really important is to understand the meaning behind whatever practice we're doing. And so for me as a pastor, it's like, why do I preach the gospel? Why do I do some teaching message? There's got to be meaning behind it. And if there's no meaning behind it, it's just me talking and pontificating on some scripture passage. It's probably not worthwhile, and that other things are probably more worthwhile. Like praying in a formulaic way, like praying through something specific and ordered it could be really, really stretching and growing. And I think that those kind of ideas are really interesting.
Yeah, an example of that is this morning on my way in, I was listening to Josh Lehman, our friend who lives out Kingston area. He released a new album, and one of the songs on the album
available to you on Spotify.
On Spotify and Apple Music, everywhere.
Plug Josh.
Yeah, he's solid. We love him. Yeah. We miss him. He's solid, and he makes amazing music. But this is an acoustic album. But one of the songs is like literally repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it wasn't until like 2 to 3 minutes in of repeating that same thing when it actually started to get to me. Like it started to go inside me, and I started to feel it rather than just like sing it as I would any other song, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the idea with
it's the goal
is liturgy is you do these things over and over and over again, and the point is that eventually they either seep in or they did seep in from the beginning, and maybe you've lost that and you kind of can reclaim that and find it again rather than just throw it out because you've lost its meaning.
Yeah, I think that's really
what
really
are some things in the church that what other things you said worship or whatever, or sorry, you said preaching the word, and if you're getting up there kind of doing it without meaning, then it's kind of empty. What are there other things?
Well, yeah, I mean, even worship music too. Like we the evangelical community, the Christian community now, we get some sort of, I guess, criticized, and I think some of it's fair that music now has become the show. And I think that there's if you make singing about liturgy, if you make it about God, if you make it about Jesus first, then it sort of becomes meaningful again. You know, it needs to kind of always come back to that.
Yeah.
You know, I love so much of what the church has been putting out as far as music and the creativity and the beauty and some of the poetry of language and stuff like that, of just expressing not only the scriptures in a new way or in a new light, or the truths of God in a new way or a new light. You know, there's some amazing stuff. But at the same time, there's fog machines and pyrotechnics, and there's the show element. And I think that those things can coexist.
They can be liturgical, and they can
100%
be purposeful and a part of it. Yep.
But it has to come down to the meaning. It has to come down to the pursuit of a practice that brings us closer to God. It has to.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
And as a worship leader, you know, like that's a strong state. Like, I love music, but if ever I fail to connect the meaning of the song, and if I place the fun element of the song before the meaning of it or whatever, you know, then I should just be silent. It's better to be silent.
Yeah.
That, you know. But other ones are, you know, like one of the ones, actually, I'd like to dig into something that you had mentioned. We talked a little bit about the idea of confession. And, you know, confession we typically think of as a Catholic or Orthodox practice, where you kind of go into a little booth and you tell the priest, you know, the things that you need to confess, sin in your life. And in the Protestant tradition, we have chucked that out the window.
Totally out the window. Yeah.
And so I want to kind of dig into, because I thought you had some really good comments about that, and some interesting ways that you're applying the meaning back into your life in a new way. So what first of all, let's say, what is the benefit of confession in the life of a Christian?
Man, the benefit of confession in the life of the Christian. I mean, practically, somebody else knows the thing that only I would know if I don't confess it. Like, the fact that it's out there in somebody else's hands who has some level of authority and influence on my life or the people's life around me it primarily is a level of accountability for me to question or second guess the things I'm saying or doing, knowing it's in somebody else's hands or will be in somebody else's hands. Right. So it's a level of accountability. It's a level of freeing myself from shame and guilt. I mean, the stuff that's inside me that nobody else knows eats me up and continues to eat me up until I am able to fully submit to God and be freed and cleansed from my sin, or get it out from inside of me into the world and see the consequences of it, rather than live in the constant fear and slavery of worry about the potential consequences of it. Yeah. So,
yeah, no, I mean, that's great. AA has this wonderful step this wonderful saying is, you're only as sick as your secrets. And the idea is that as soon as we confess something, you know, we're freed from the bondage that it holds over us, you know. Yeah. The secret's far more dangerous than the sin or whatever. Yeah. I think that's really helpful. Yeah. And so we kind of took that idea. Well, first of all, too, the scripture tells us that we should confess our sins one to another.
Yes.
It says that.
Yes.
Right. So,
which means me to you, you to me, or me to somebody.
Yeah. Somebody. But you had mentioned to me this kind of idea, and I thought it was really fascinating. Why don't you tell the listeners about sort of your spiritual board of directors? Is kind of how you had talked about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's not exactly the same, but
yep.
Yeah,
I guess something I'm working towards, and I'm like, again, I'm 2/3 done, and I've been 2/3 done it and haven't had full implementation of it. I was getting close to it, and then obviously the COVID stuff hit, which doesn't have to impact it, but it kind of does. But the idea is, for me, it's connected to mentorship as well. But for me, for a long time, I felt like I've needed a mentor or somebody who I trust and look up to in all areas of their life, And I feel the safety and the freedom as well to confess sin towards and know that it's safe with them, that they're going to guide me, they're going to be wise counsel. They're also going to hold me accountable and care about me enough to hold me accountable. But that there's nothing I can't tell them that is unsafe to share with them. That was the idea. And I was looking for that for a little while. And to be honest, I had a hard time finding it. And that's not because there's not awesome people around me. But part of that is just when you're a pastor, you work with other pastors, but they're your colleagues, right? Yeah. And some of them are your bosses, and others are your friends or your peers. And so there's a dynamic there that's not always that safe. There's a level of like you trust them because they're going through the same sort of stuff because they're also pastors. Right. But you work together in the same organization, right, with the same people. So there's something that needed to be. I was looking for somebody that could have some understanding for a pastor, but not be someone I worked with directly. But I have some pastor friends who don't live nearby. And then the other criteria was that it needs to be someone I can actually sit in front of face to face on a regular basis. Yeah. And they can challenge me face to face. Like I can stand up against a video call or a phone call. It's not as scary. Sitting across the room from you, looking at you eye to eye, that's a little bit more of a level of accountability. It's a little more intimidating. So basically kind of coupled that desire and need with just looking for kind of mentorship in certain areas of my life and kind of all areas of my life. I was having a hard time finding one person who fit that mold that I didn't know already. And I asked a few people for leads and I didn't get good leads on somebody. And then somebody I came across somebody with the idea of a personal board of directors. And the idea was that it doesn't have to be just one person who fits that perfect mold who you respect and look up to in all areas of their life, and that you can confess all of your sin to, and they can have, all access to every area of your life. But actually looking for different people who you look up to for different reasons and for different areas of their life, and give that kind of access to the same level of vulnerability, but with a primary focus on one certain area of my life. And so the 6 kind of areas of my life were diet and exercise, finances, family, life and marriage, rest, Sabbath, and social time kind of relationships, pastoral, just straight up pastoral ministry, mentor, and am I missing one?
I don't know.
Theology and personal mission.
There you go.
Those are 6 categories that I broke up just based on my life. Yeah. And I picked 6 men that each of them I look up to and respect for different reasons. Yeah. Who I'm kind of developed a program for, and I haven't fully implemented it with them, but it would give them full access to my life, and then it would be a monthly. They would be following up with me monthly for me to confess, quote unquote, confess sins to them on a monthly basis, or answer a series of questions about my life and then certain things. And so that's kind of does that paint the picture? Yeah, no.
And I was just struck with the idea of like, we often get stuck in, we think the liturgy is the target to aim for. And I don't think that that's true. What I loved about what the kind of the journey that you've been on is that you saw a missing piece of meaning in your life and in your discipleship and in your growth and in and your leadership, and you went after the meaning first. Yeah. And that the liturgy sort of took the form of this new, this spiritual form of board of directors. Yeah. Directors. And I love that idea because as a Christian, we all have struggled with finding meaningful relationships to help us in this discipleship journey. Yep. It's hard. No one person fits the mold, and there is a huge benefit to a high church tradition where a priest has authority and has access and has authentic, that confession time, and can kind of kick you in the pants a little bit, kind of instruct you on what's right and what's wrong and how to make it right or whatever, and all that kind of stuff in their own tradition and stuff. And we have lost sort of that piece of meaning. Yeah. And I think that is a great a creative way to kind of reincorporate a liturgy that's really, really valuable. Yeah. And so for you guys listening, I think that one of the things that you should be thinking about, especially in this season, is just what kinds of things do we invest our time? What practices do we continue to go through and continue to invest time in? Maybe it's being a fan of the Cleveland Browns, and
hope not.
Right, like me, which is why I don't really watch football. It's because it's unwatchable. Sorry, Cleveland.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what you call dead tradition.
Dread tradition. Yeah, being a fan of the. Yeah, I know. It's kind of good that we're not going to lose this year. If this continues. So anyway, what I was trying to say was, if you're at home listening and you're thinking about these things, I would encourage you to just consider, kind of take that liturgical audit, see what you're investing your time and your money and your talents and your energies into, and try to incorporate some liturgies into your life that might be more specifically spiritual.
Yeah.
That might be more specifically geared around development as a believer, as a follower in Christ.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the motivation, the primary meaning was the health of the disciple and the health of the disciple maker. That was the idea. The idea was, I am healthier as a disciple if I have this, and then I'm healthier as a disciple maker. I have better influence. I have better protections in my life. I am living a more disciple-like life, and I'm actually more effective in actually loving others and discipling others. That was kind of the motivation, the end goal, which is what led to, well, if that's true, the whole self needs to be healthier. And the whole self includes my financial life, my physical health and fitness life, my, personal mission and theology life. Like it includes all those things. That was kind of the meaning of motivation. Yeah. And then that's where, so like what you're saying, it was built out of that.
Built out of it. And I love it. And that's actually how those liturgies started to begin with.
That's how they all start.
Is they were going after meaning, and the liturgy formed around it. Yeah. Whether it be baptism or communion or marriage, even as a ceremony, as a liturgy, all those things were built out of a desire to fulfill meaning. And I think that's really, 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 really cool. And I think we can learn a lot from our Catholic brothers and sisters and our Anglican brothers and sisters and people around the world who, practice the faith in a different manner. Yeah. Those things, we'd be foolish not to learn from them.
Which is what we're trying to do with the Seder meal coming up this weekend. That's the idea.
And I'm so excited about that. Yep. So, well, guys, thank you so much for listening. I'll encourage you again, just make sure you subscribe, like the channel, and make sure you comment. Let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about. This is for you. So the more that you share with us, the more that we can, chit-chat about it. We're hoping to be able to have guests on and bring some more voices in because, we're just two idiots. So, well, one idiot and me.
1.5.
Did you see the burn? I burned you anyway.
Thanks.
Well, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week for sure. Make sure you follow us on the live stream and stuff like that as we continue to do this COVID series season. And happy Palm Sunday.
Yep.
From me to you.